Dear colleagues, I call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Question to order. Colleagues, the agenda for this meeting has been distributed. Could I please invite you to adopt the agenda? Are there any objections? The agenda is adopted. Does anyone wish to speak against the draft agenda? No, thank you. This morning we will first consider the remaining supplementary items, beginning with the ending the scourge of anti-Semitism in the OSCE region, proposed by Mr. Cardin from USA. We will then consider the supplementary item on the role of civil society in fostering democratic and inclusive societies, proposed by Ms. Fry of Canada. Then we'll consider the final supplementary item on navigating contemporary journalism and gender-related challenges, proposed by Madame Daniela de Ridder from Germany. We will then move on to the final business of the election of committee officers. May I remind you, colleagues, that I wish to speak in the plenary debates. If you wish to speak in the plenary debates, you will need to register with the table office by 2 p.m. today. May I also remind colleagues that early voting for assembly officer positions is available for members who have an unavoidable obligation to leave the annual session before Wednesday. This will take place in the table office from 12 noon to 6 p.m. today. I remind you that members must request early voting in writing to the table office before 5:30 p.m. today. I repeat, this relates to the election of assembly officers, not our committee officers, which will complete our committee officer elections later in this meeting. We now move to the supplementary item on ending the scourge of anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. I would now like to give the floor to the sponsor of the supplementary item, Mr. Cardin from the USA. Mr. Cardin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank you for your courtesy. 20 years ago, the OSCE participating states adopted the Berlin Declaration, which recognized anti-Semitism for what it is: a threat to democracy, human rights, and the security of the OSCE region and beyond. States pledged to intensify efforts to combat anti-Semitism in all of its forms and to strengthen policies which promote tolerance and non-discrimination. Madam Chair, I point out that the ability to get to the Berlin Declaration came as an initiative from the Parliamentary Assembly. Efforts by the U.S. and German delegations at a Parliamentary Assembly meeting led to the OSCE convening the Berlin meeting, which led to the Berlin Conference. Since 2015, I've had the honor to serve as the OSCE PA's Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism, and Intolerance. I've used this role to urge the OSCE participating states, the United States included, to develop strategies and invest the political will and resources necessary to eradicate hate by developing and sharing best practices. This has included drafting legislation, building broad-based intercultural and interfaith coalitions, educating young people, advancing global diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, supporting remembrance of Jewish and Roma individuals and other communities impacted by the Holocaust, countering Holocaust denial and distortion, addressing discrimination impacting the LGBTQI+ community, indigenous, Afro-descents, migrants, and other vulnerable populations. Today, anti-Semitic incidents continue to threaten the lives and livelihoods of Jews across our region. In the approximately 9 months since Hamas's horrible terror attack of October 7th, Jews in the United States, and notably on American college campuses, have experienced a surge in harassment, bullying, and attacks. American synagogues have also been increasingly the targets. Elsewhere in the OSCE region, civil society and law enforcement have reported violence, intimidation, and dehumanization not only of Jews, but also of Muslims, of members of minority groups. Incidents have included cases of genocide glorification, terror attacks, and burning of religious symbols, including the Quran. As parliamentarians, we have a special obligation to act. Not only must we redouble our efforts to ensure the physical safety of Jewish people across our region, but also to actively promote vibrant Jewish communities and foster Jewish life. That is why I sponsored this supplementary item, and I urge us to pass it, to urgently develop concrete approaches to implement our commitments to the Berlin Conference. For example, we must cultivate broad-based interfaith coalitions and develop programs and policies which develop trust, facilitate dialogue, and enhance social cohesion. We must confront Holocaust denial and distortion by increasing investments in education, Holocaust remembrance, and broad awareness of Jewish history and Jewish life. We must develop and implement national plans and reporting mechanisms to mobilize resources and strengthen efforts to counter anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. I am pleased that the United States, the Biden administration, has done just that, as has other states in the OSCE, but we all should be doing that. We must strengthen participating states' ability to support Jewish communities in their efforts to provide security for synagogues, schools, community centers, and others. In the United States, we passed nonprofit security grants to help our religious institutions protect themselves against potential threats. We must listen to the concerns of Jewish communities to understand their experiences, both online and offline, and ensure anti-Semitism is understood, recognized, and properly addressed. We must adequately fund and staff the OSCE and its institutions as a practical means of augmenting national efforts to foster inclusion, increase accountability, and build resilience to hate, extremism, and disinformation. Madam Chair, to continue our work on this issue during our time in Bucharest, I invite all of our members to attend a side event that will be held at 13:30 today on the ground floor of this facility. Expert panelists will share national initiatives and other practical recommendations to enhance our ability to end the scourge of anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. I look forward to seeing our colleagues at that meeting. I urge you to support this resolution, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardin. And the floor is now open for the debate, and we have one speaker registered in the speakers list, and it is Lord Alfred Dubs. So please, Lord Dubs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I congratulate Senator Cardin on his consistent advocacy of campaigning against anti-Semitism, of his consistent approach to this. He's had side meetings before, which I was happy to attend, and I think we owe him an enormous vote of thanks for doing this and for staying with it, because it is a really serious issue. However, I also welcome the fact that the third paragraph talks about condemning the rise of anti-Muslim hatred. Can I just tell a little story? About 3 years ago, I was asked to go to a school in East London. It was a boys' school. It was a maintained school. But it was also a school which I think had pretty well every boy in it was a Muslim. And their project, to which they asked me to speak, was a dual project on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And I thought that was pretty good for all Muslim boys to be learning about this. And when we got to the Q&A, the first question from a 14-year-old Muslim boy was, what do I say to anybody who denies the Holocaust happened? And I think that was a terrific question, and it's a sign that certainly in that school, some of the principles that Senator Cardin has been talking about were obviously listened to and were being applied. We also have in the UK several organizations, one of them the Holocaust Education Trust, who campaign loudly and clearly to spread the word among schools about what happened. They take school parties to Auschwitz, and they have ambassadors who spread the word for those that haven't had a chance to go on a visit to Auschwitz, to actually spread the word in schools and so on. So there is an important job to be done. Where it's done well, it works, and the message is spread. But we always have a new generation of young people, and we have to keep spreading it. We can't just say we've done it and that's it. So I congratulate Senator Cardin on his perseverance, on his commitment to ending the scourge of anti-Semitism, and I'm sure we all applaud his efforts, and good luck to him and more success to him and indeed to the similar efforts that are going on in all OSCE member countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Debs, for these important words. We will now move to consider the one amendment submitted to the draft resolution. Copies of the amendment have been made available. I will call the proposer of the amendment first, and then will call any opponent of the amendment. As agreed by the committee yesterday to save time and to avoid many votes on items that have broad support, if no amendment has been tabled to a paragraph, to a resolution, and if nobody requests a vote on a paragraph, we can consider it adopted. Needless to say, any time a specific vote is requested, we will do so. We will first take paragraphs 1 to 5 together. Does anyone want a vote on any of these paragraphs? With no request for a vote, paragraphs 1 to 5 are adopted. I call Mr. Haidu from Romania to propose Amendment 1 to paragraph 6.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, esteemed colleague Senator Ben Cardin, OSCE was created with focus on promoting peace and stability in Europe. Protecting minority rights was a key part of this mission. The draft resolution has reference in paragraph 3 condemning that all forms of intolerance and hate that disproportionately affect Jews and other ethnic and religious minority groups should be condemned. Protecting minority rights was a key part of the mission of OSCE. By including reference to national minorities, the text acknowledges the OSCE's historical purpose and its ongoing commitment to protecting vulnerable groups within participating states. The OSCE has a High Commissioner on National Minorities who works to protect the rights of these groups. Referencing them strengthens the connection between the OSCE's existing efforts and the fight against intolerance. The OSCE and the OSCE-PA are dedicated to promoting human rights. This amendment would highlight the inclusivity of the OSCE's mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 1? What is Mr. Cardin's opinion of the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank my Romanian colleague for this amendment. I think it strengthens the resolution. One of our major objectives is to protect the rights of national minorities, and I support the amendment.
Thank you. I shall now put the Amendment 1 to the vote. Will all those in favor of the amendment please raise their voting cards? Will all those against please raise their voting cards? Are there any abstentions? There's been 39 votes in favor of the amendment and nobody abstained, nobody was against. The Amendment 1 is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 6 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? Any abstentions? There were 40 in favor of the paragraph 6 as amended, nobody abstained, and nobody was against. The paragraph 6 as amended is hereby adopted. We will now take paragraphs 7 to 13 together. Does anyone want to vote on any of these paragraphs separately? With no request for a vote, paragraphs 7 to 13 are adopted. That concludes the consideration of amendment. I propose that we now formally move to a vote on the draft resolution as amended. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise their voting cards? Would those against please raise their voting cards? Are there any abstentions? So it's 42 in favor of the draft resolution. Nobody abstained, nobody was against, and I can congratulate Mr. Carden for the resolution. We will now consider the next supplementary item, draft resolution number 15 on the role of civil society in fostering democratic and inclusive societies. I would now like to give the floor to the sponsor of this supplementary item, Ms. Fry from Canada. Ms. Eddie Fry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to congratulate my colleague, Ben Carden, on an excellent supplementary item. I think we can agree that we've seen globally freedoms, human rights, and democracy are on the decline or stagnating in the region and globally. And I think that it's important that we talk about the fact that because this group, this organization, is committed to democracy, is committed to human rights, is committed to inclusivity, that we need to be able to discuss this issue from a point of view of civil society, which is one of the strong pillars of any democratic society. I have traveled around the region and I've met in places like Yerevan, Budapest, and in other parts of the region. I've met with civil society organizations, and to my dismay and concern, I have found that in fact, many of those organizations are beginning to decline, to lose funding, and many of them are under attack and being unable to do the work that they do. If we agree that as a democratic society, we need civil society that is represented by civil society organizations, we have to support them. And so I think what I wanted to talk a little bit about is the dismay I've met in hearing about what's going on in the region. One of the things we've seen is that civil society has been denied resources, whether it's government funding or even if that funding comes from a foreign country, even a country within the region, that in fact some of these groups are being dubbed, they're being forwarded by foreign agents. And so many of these groups can no longer exist because they don't have funds. We've also seen that there's legislation in some of the region where there is denial, accusing civil society groups of foreign interference, of foreign agents. Also, there's denial of their right to exist. There is a denial and a harassment of these groups, especially women's organizations and LGBTQ SI organizations as well, so that their ability to exist, to advocate, to do the work they do in representing minority groups and in representing civil society is actually curtailed. One of the other things that we've noticed very much, to my dismay, is the fact that there is actually legislation prohibiting some of the work that these groups do. Any good civil society needs to, any good democracy needs to know that meeting with civil society, getting their input, even if they disagree with the government of the day, is an important way to get your finger on the pulse of what the people in your country think, what they need, and what their needs and their requirements are. And so for you to be able to know that, you've got to talk with civil society. By dismissing civil society, by not fostering the inclusion that civil society represents, we are actually curtailing democracy in many of its forms. So I'm hoping that you could support my supplementary item, because I think as we are bound and vowed to make sure that democracy succeeds in this region, we need to pay attention to this very important and disconcerting trend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Fry. The floor is now open for debate. The time limit for speeches is 3 minutes. I give the floor, and we have only one speaker in the list. I give the floor to Madam Annie Koutrakis from Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I would like to thank Dr. Hetty Fry for sponsoring this supplementary item and for her commitment to the OSCE PA over many years. This SI makes an important link between the strength of civil society and the health of democracies. CSOs have an essential role to play in both established democracies and in countries transitioning to democratic governance. They create a crucial link between governments and the people they represent. They provide a channel for citizens to engage constructively with governments and a mechanism to enable public participation in decision-making. CSOs are also critical to holding governments to account and to ensuring transparency and equity in the delivery of social services. Dr. Fry's SI also highlights the fundamental role that CSOs play to promote human rights, including the rights of women, as well as those of LGBTI persons and other marginalized groups. Among other kinds of supports, CSOs provide services to women and LGBTI persons in the areas of sexual and reproductive health and assist survivors of gender-based violence. The delivery of these and other frontline social services by CSOs are vital to the health and well-being of people across our countries. Unfortunately, as this SI points out, CSOs are increasingly facing threats to their independence and ability to operate freely. These threats include efforts to deprive CSOs of public funding or to impose limitations on their access to funding from private and foreign donors. Dr. Fry's SI also sheds light to worrying regional and global trends related to the rise of so-called anti-gender governments or movements, which aim to obstruct the activities of CSOs and individuals engaged in the promotion of LGBTI rights. Like many of you, I am especially troubled by Russia's crackdown on civil society. The Russian government has relentlessly persecuted CSOs, especially those that focus on human rights and governance. Among other actions, Russian authorities impede the work of CSOs by requiring groups that receive foreign support or are deemed to engage in broadly defined political activity to register as foreign agents. These actions have had a chilling effect on freedom of speech and assembly in Russia, the environment for which has only worsened since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Colleagues, parliaments and parliamentarians have an important role to play in creating an enabling environment for CSOs to operate and make their voices heard. This SI issues a number of concrete calls to action designed to support CSOs in carrying out their important work. For example, it calls on participating states to provide channels for meaningful engagement between governments and CSOs on the development of public policy, urges participating states to ensure that CSOs can engage in fundraising activities without undue restrictions, and recommends that the OSCE establish a system and methodology to monitor threats to civic space at an early stage. I would like to thank Dr. Fry for putting the essential work of CSOs on our agenda. I urge you all to support this supplementary item, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Madam Koutrakis. And since no oral or written amendments have been proposed to the draft resolution, which means that it is perfect and complete, we can now take all the paragraphs 1 to 28 together. Does anyone want a vote on any of these paragraphs separately? No. With no request for a vote, paragraphs 1 to 28 are adopted. We now move to a vote on the draft resolution. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise their voting cards? Would those against please raise their voting cards? Any abstentions? So it's 41 in favor of the resolution. Nobody is against and nobody abstained. The draft resolution is adopted and I can congratulate Madam Fry for a wonderful work. We will now consider the final supplementary item, draft resolution number 10, navigating contemporary journalism and gender-related challenges. I would now like to give the floor to the sponsor of the supplementary item, Madame de Ridder from Germany. Madame de Ridder, you have the floor.
Danke, Frau Vorsitzende. Mir ist dieser Supplementary Item ganz besonders wichtig und er ist mir vor allem auch persönlich wichtig, weil ich ausgebildete Journalistin bin. Ich will die Gelegenheit nutzen, um an den Mut und das Engagement von Journalistinnen zu erinnern. Lassen Sie mich das ungewöhnlicherweise so einführen, die durch ihre Tätigkeit nicht nur bedroht, sondern ermordet wurden. Ich möchte erinnern an Anna Politewskaja, die 2006 ermordet wurde. Sie wissen das vermutlich alle, weil sie sich intensiv mit Korruption im russischen Verteidigungsministerium befasst hat und mit Korruption in Tschetschenien. Ihr Mut wurde mit der Todesstrafe, wenn Sie so wollen, geahndet. Korruption ist etwas, was Journalistinnen häufiger ansprechen. Es kostet Mut, dies aber auch zu skandalisieren. Das hat Anna Politewskaja getan. Daphne Caruana Galizia hat dies ebenfalls getan und Sie wissen alle, dass auch sie ermordet wurde, weil sie Korruption angeprangert hat, weil sie dies verurteilt und weil sie dies aufgedeckt hat. Mutige Journalistinnen verdienen aber auch unsere Aufmerksamkeit, wenn sie beispielsweise wie Marie Colvin als Kriegsreporterinnen tätig sind und hier auch Gräueltaten aufdecken und uns darauf aufmerksam machen, wie wichtig es ist, aus Regionen zu berichten, in die sich andere nicht einmal mehr hineinwagen. Dort mutig tätig zu sein als Pressereporter, als Presseagentin und die Medien- und Pressefreiheit zu betonen, das ist ausgesprochen wichtig und ein Element unserer Demokratie. Wenn Sie wissen wollen, wer Marie Colvin ist, möchte ich Ihnen den Film A Private Life empfehlen, in dem Sie ihre Biografie nachvollziehen können. Sie ist auch ebenfalls grausam gestorben. Liebe Frau Vorsitzende, Sie wissen es vielleicht gar nicht, aber Sie sind ein bisschen der Spiritus Rex dieses Antrages, denn Sie selbst haben in Wien ein Side-Event angeboten zu Journalistinnen und den Gefahren, in denen sie von ihrer Arbeit oder bei ihrer Arbeit bedroht sind. Wir müssen den Mut belohnen, weil sie in besonderer Weise bedroht sind. Und deshalb komme ich zu dem zweiten Aspekt, der in meinem Supplementary Item eine Rolle spielt, nämlich die Veränderungen, denen der Journalismus heute ausgesetzt ist. Wir haben immer weniger, und das beklagen ja auch große Verlagshäuser, seriöser Zeitungen. Wir haben immer mehr veränderte Arbeitsbedingungen, in denen es kaum noch möglich ist, langfristig Recherchen zu betreiben und Qualitätsjournalismus zu offerieren. Stattdessen nehmen immer mehr Internetplattformen den Platz von Qualitätsjournalismus ein. Das ist auf der einen Seite sehr erfreulich, weil so auch Presse- und Medienfreiheit unterstützt werden können, weil hier auch diejenigen publizieren können, die eben möglicherweise von großen Verlagen wenig gehört werden oder unsichtbar bleiben. Wir alle, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, nutzen ja Social-Media-Kanäle, um zu publizieren, was wir alles so täglich tun als Abgeordnete oder auch deutlich zu machen, wo wir mit Dingen, die unsere Demokratie bedrohen, nicht einverstanden sind. Gleichzeitig, und das macht die Ambivalenz deutlich, die wir mit diesem Antrag noch einmal deutlich machen wollen, gibt es auch über genau diese Social-Media-Kanäle Angriffe auf die Integrität von Journalistinnen, sicher auch von Journalisten, aber Journalistinnen als Frauen sind hier auch noch mal besonders bedroht. Ich will dies besonders betonen, weil es eben auch nicht nur Hass und Hetze im Netz gibt, sondern eben auch sehr viel und stark formulierte sexualisierte Gewalt gegen Journalistinnen. Auch wir Abgeordnete, wir weibliche Abgeordnete kennen dies zuweilen und es geht hin bis zu Todesdrohungen oder Angriffe auch oder Drohungen, die auch unsere Kinder betreffen. Ich selber bin auch davon betroffen und ich glaube, es betrifft auch viele Kolleginnen. Damit wird Presse- und Meinungsfreiheit eingeschränkt. Dies ist aber eine ganz zentrale Säule unserer Demokratie. Ja, wir sollten genau hinschauen, wenn Menschen bedroht werden. Und wir wissen, dass auch Journalistinnen besonders mutig sind. Mir ist dies auch aufgefallen bei Pressekonferenzen, die stattgefunden haben, nachdem wir etwa Wahlen beobachtet haben. Deshalb vielleicht noch mal ein kleiner Hinweis, den ich abschließend mit meiner Einführung zu diesem Supplementary Item verbinden möchte. Wenn wir zu Pressekonferenzen gehen nach Wahlbeobachtungen, dann formulieren wir doch bitte so, dass mutige Journalistinnen nur noch zitieren müssen, was wir sagen. Dies bringt sie, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, weniger in Gefahr, denn ein Zitat ist zunächst einmal ein unschuldiges Instrument, weil man sich ja auf eine andere Person, die dieses sagt, beziehen kann und dafür nicht unmittelbar ins Gefängnis gesperrt wird. Lassen Sie uns deshalb diesen Supplementary Item diskutieren, aber auch schauen, wo wir Presse- und Medienfreiheit insbesondere für Journalistinnen, aber auch für solche Journalisten unterstützen können, die sich feministisch nennen. Ich möchte all denjenigen, die diesen Antrag mit unterstützt haben, herzlich danken für ihren Support und freue mich auf die Diskussion, die nun folgt. Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Daniela, very much. I personally consider this topic extremely important. Now, the floor is open for debate. We have 2 persons in the list. The time limit for speeches is 3 minutes. And now I give the floor to Mr. Pons from Spain.
Muchas gracias, Presidente. Disculpas porque he tenido que salir por una llamada de teléfono, pero como me he leído la resolución, quería solo hacer unos comentarios. Primero, todo el apoyo a la temática que ha presentado la compañera de Heider. Y quería hacer simplemente una serie de reflexiones sobre el derecho a la información, ¿no? Primero, que creo que en esta Asamblea tenemos que trabajar para defender el valor de la información. Hay un principio general, ¿no?, que es el de que se sepan las cosas, es uno de los valores de lo público, del valor de la democracia y, por tanto, hay que trabajar sobre la democracia de las informaciones por encima de la dictadura de las opiniones, ¿no?, que es algo de los temas más relevantes, ¿no? Y me gustaría hacer solamente una reflexión para complementar lo que ha dicho la señora de Heider en su resolución sobre que la democracia reposa sobre la promoción en el corazón de lo público, de la verdad de los hechos, sino de la relatividad de las opiniones y actualmente parece que estuviéramos más centrados en la relatividad de las opiniones que en la búsqueda de la de verdad y de la defensa de la cosa pública. Es decir, conocer la verdad es uno de los mejores servicios que se puede hacer al pueblo, y no es una frase mía, es una frase de finales del 18. Y me gustaría también reflexionar sobre algunos autores que dicen que nunca el poder político fue tan poderoso y nunca el poder de lo público para contrarrestar eso ha sido tan débil, ¿no? Algunas personas reflexionan sobre eso. Y me gustaría terminar, sobre todo hablando, y tuve la oportunidad de participar en la conferencia ministerial de alto nivel de la OSCE en Malta, y efectivamente estaba presente una mujer, Teresa Ribeiro, que es la responsable de la libertad de los medios, y por supuesto que hablamos de la libertad de los medios y el rol de las mujeres, que tiene que ser, por supuesto, protegido y valorado más, pero también estuvimos hablando de cómo fluye la desinformación, los bulos, las mentiras, la manipulación en relación a una realidad urgente que es el cambio climático. Y, por tanto, una de las mayores manipulaciones que se está produciendo en el actual modus operandi de algunos movimientos es instrumentalizar el cambio climático convirtiéndolo en una caricatura. Y, por cierto, si se manipula el cambio climático y se hace creer que no hay esa transición justa, el gran perdedor es la democracia. Muchísimas gracias, y gracias a la diputada de Heider por esta resolución. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Pons. And the last speaker in our list is Madame Özgül Saki from Turkey.
Thank you. First of all, I suppose that I agree with all items this draft resolution. I emphasize that since the Israel last attacks, 108 journalists confirmed killed. 49 were reported arrested. Journalism are under serious threat all over the world, but in the Middle East, Palestine, Syria, Israel, and also Turkey, the situation is grave. I would like to discuss how the safety of journalists. The cases of violence, such as attack, detention, arrest, and mistreatment that women journalists in particular face while practicing their profession, are well documented by various organizations. Women journalists imprisoned further emphasize the extent of threat to the freedom of the press. These violations that women journalists are subjected to also constitute an attack on the feminist struggle and the struggle for gender equality. Women journalists who expose the exploitation of women's labor, violence, and who expose attack on women's achievements and lives of women in Kurdish provinces. Through privatizing war policies are becoming target of the Turkish government. One of the violations of rights strip search, which have recently come to the agency. Mesopotamia Agency reporter Esra Solindal, who was arrested on April and was kept in solitary confinement in Bakırköy Women's Closed Prison for about a month, and was subjected to strip search twice in prison. I would like to conclude my remarks by mentioning Genealogy magazine editor Nagihan Akarsel, who was assassinated in an armed attack on 2022 in Süleymaniye in Iraq, work as a journalist. The assassination is directly related to Nagihan Akarsel's identity as a woman, journalist, and of course as a Kurd. It is essential that safety of journalists, especially women journalists working in conflict zone, be protected, that all acts of violence against journalists by state officials be investigated and punished. We must do more for freedom of journalists, of course. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions. And now we will first take paragraphs 1 to 40 together. Does anyone want a vote on any of these paragraphs? With no request for a vote, paragraphs 1 to 40 are adopted. Now, an oral amendment has been proposed by the sponsor of the supplementary item, Madame Daniela de Ridder, to replace paragraph 41 as follows. You will see it on the screens. Yes. Calls on a big tech companies to make the information that they collect on people open and freely available in the aggregated form, and further calls upon them to reverse the trend in the reduction of transparency and monetizing people's personal information. Okay. In accordance with paragraph 10 of Rule 22 of our Rules of Procedure, first I will ask whether there is any objection to the oral amendment being considered. If there is any objection, the oral amendment cannot be considered and it falls. Yeah. There's a slight difference in what I've said and what is on the screen. So I can read it properly once again if there is a request for it. So what I've read is the correct text. And maybe Daniela will explain.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to propose an oral amendment to the paragraph 41. The reason is that it has been pointed out that as originally drafted, the paragraph could infringe on privacy rights if fully implemented. While I think that we must continue to push big tech companies to be more transparent, this must be done in a careful and diligent way. I would ask the technicians to please display the text, what you already did, and I suggest to replace the current paragraph 41 with the following text that you can see right now. Yes. So I think this is this is still not the right text, but I just will read it. So let me suggest to replace the current paragraph 41 with the following text, and I hope you listen carefully. So the new text will be calls on big tech companies to make the information that they collect on people open and freely available in the aggregated form, and further calls upon them to reverse the trend in the reduction of transparency and monetizing people's personal information. That's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Daniela, for explaining. We read the same text, so I think now it's perfectly clear to everybody. So I'll repeat the procedure. In accordance with paragraph 10 of Rule 22 of our Rules of Procedure, first I will ask whether there is any objections to the oral amendment being considered. If there is any objection, the oral amendment cannot be considered and it falls. So if there is no objection, we will proceed to consider the amendment in the same way as other amendments. We will then decide by a simple majority vote whether to adopt the oral amendment. Is there any objections to the oral amendment being considered? There are no objections. I now call Ms. de Ridder to speak to the amendment. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think she can maybe you, Daniela, can add some few comments at the end. So, does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote. Will all those in favor of the amendment please raise their voting cards? Will all those against please raise your voting cards? Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. 37 in favor of the oral amendment, one against, and there was no abstention. So 1 against and no abstentions. The oral amendment is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 41 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? Any abstentions? "37 votes in favor, nobody was against, nobody abstained, and the oral amendment, or the paragraph, pardon, paragraph 41 as amended is adopted. We will now take paragraphs 42 and 43 together. Does anyone want a vote on any of these paragraphs separately? With no request for a vote, paragraphs 42 to 43 are adopted. I propose that we now formally move to a vote on the draft resolution as amended. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise their voting cards? Those against? Any abstentions? So it's 40 in favor of the resolution. Nobody was against, nobody abstained, and the draft resolution is adopted, and I can congratulate Daniela for her tremendous work. Now, we now come to the election of the committee officers for the next annual session of the Assembly. The International Secretariat informs me that the following nominations have been received in the table office. For the chair, there is one candidate, myself, Madam Lucia Potůčková from Czech Republic. Thank you. As the position of the chair is not contested, I declare that Madam Lucia Potůčková, is elected by acclamation. It's quite awkward. Thank you. Thank you for your trust, and I can promise you that I will execute my position with the same positive energy, with the enthusiasm, and of course with empathy and effectivity as I did this term. And maybe I will finally learn how to use this gavel. So, for the vice chair, we have one candidate, Mr. Sargis Kandanian from Armenia. Please. Yes. As the position of the vice chair is not contested, I declare that Mr. Sargis Kandanian is elected by acclamation, and I congratulate him. I'm also looking forward to the next year cooperation. We were a really good team. For the rapporteur, we have one candidate, Madam Carina Oderbrink from Sweden. Where are you? Yeah. As the position is not contested, I declare that Madam Carina Odebrink from Sweden is elected by acclamation. I congratulate you. From this chair, I would also like to thank to my former rapporteur, Mr. Ben Malik Ashur, for his wonderful job he did and for our really good cooperation. So, dear colleagues, that concludes business of the Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions, and I thank you for your contributions to the productive discussions we have had. Thank you.